So as a fan of Pokemon and the Pokemon games, I think it comes as no surprise that I have accrued quite a few consoles, specifically handheld consoles, to play those Pokemon games on. So sitting next to me, I have my entire console collection, and I thought I could just take some time to kind of talk through the different consoles I own, where I got them, how I came about them, and just sort of share the story behind my journey as a Pokemon fan and a fan of the mainline series games. I think the way that makes most sense to talk about these consoles is in the order which I received them or purchased them, because I think that kind of creates a timeline to share what games I was playing at what different points in my life. So let's get into it. So my first ever Nintendo / video game in general console was this right here, Nintendo DS Lite. And this console means a lot to me. It was a gift from my grandpa. I got it when I was about like 7 or 8 years old. And initially when I got it, it was actually just the console. I don't think anyone in my family realized that like you need separate games to go into the console to actually be able to play it. So I think for maybe the first couple of weeks of owning this, I had really nothing to do on it other than just mess around and the various different settings and chat features that they have on this thing, which is kind of funny. But the first games I did receive shortly after this for my birthday were Pokemon games, unsurprisingly, and I played Pokemon Soul Silver and Pokemon Black and White pretty close in like around the same time frame. So those were sort of hand in hand the first Pokemon games I ever played, and that was such a great time to really be introduced to the franchise because I think honestly those are some of the peak games that they've ever made. But yeah, this is my original console. You can kind of see up close there are definitely some scratches and some wear on it. Unfortunately, over time I have lost the original stylus as well as the Game Boy Advance slot cover, but I still love this. It's one of my favorite ways to play Nintendo DS games. I typically try to play games on the hardware that they were released on, so even though I have more updated, more current consoles, I do still find myself coming back to this a lot. Also just love the size of it. I feel like it's such an easy to hold and easy to carry around console, and I feel like for the sake of nostalgia, we've gotta play that original menu. Beautiful. This is a top tier console for me. The second console I ever received was this. It's a Game Boy Advance, original Game Boy Advance. I received this as a gift from my cousin alongside a copy of Kirby The Amazing Mirror, I believe is the game title, and I loved it. This was so cool to see. This was not a console that came out while I was like actively playing games, but my cousin kind of lost interest in it at that point and sort of grown out of it to a degree, and so it was a really cool hand-me-down to receive. I remember thinking it was so interesting to have a console that didn't have a second screen. You just have the one single display here, and also having batteries, which fortunately this does not have batteries right now. While I do love this console as a sort of memory, it is not one I come back to play frequently, and the batteries I had in here were sitting in it for God knows how long and actually corroded inside of the machine, so I need to do some serious cleaning of this thing to get it to operate again, hopefully. So right now it's kind of just a display item. There are a couple of other ways I prefer playing Game Boy Advance games at this point in time, which we'll get to later, but this is a super nice memory of a console and a great gift to have received. Those consoles lasted me for a pretty substantial amount of time. I feel like I was able to play, a couple hand-me-down Game Boy Advance games, got a couple of second-hand copies of the older Pokemon games off of eBay to play on the Game Boy Advance, and I was playing my whole catalog of Pokemon from Gen 4 through Gen 5 and the Gen 5 sequels as well on my DS, so I was super happy with that, and I felt like I didn't need anything else. But then the trailer started to release for Pokemon X and Y, and that was when I started to get a little bit more curious. At that point, the 3DS had already been out for a while, and I knew some friends and people who had it, but I never seen a need or felt a need for it because I was such a Pokemon head and there had been no Pokemon games on the system just yet. But then I feel like around the time Pokemon X and Y was coming out, around that holiday season, was also when this next console was revealed, which is the Nintendo 2DS, the dual screen but completely flat, updated version of the 3DS that didn't offer the 3D feature. Now, the 3D feature was never something that honestly I was ever super interested in as a kid. I remember it honestly kind of hurting my head a little bit when playing on some of my friends' versions of the console. And so it just was something that at that point in time I was never super into, weirdly. And this was a little bit cheaper and was coming out around the same time as Pokemon X and Y. So I received this as a gift from my grandma along with a copy of Pokemon Y. And that was how I played through the next couple generations of Pokemon. And look, I get that when you look at this does not have the same nostalgia, it doesn't have the same sleek design as even some of the newer consoles do. But I think anyone who has one of these can't deny that when it comes to just holding it, there's honestly a certain comfort in it. And I think when it comes to longer gaming sessions, and I feel like particularly shiny hunting in 3DS or the regular DS Pokemon games, I honestly go to this a lot more frequently than any of my other consoles just because of the combination of the comfort of holding it, the longer battery life as compared to the DS Lite. And so for that, I still have a lot of appreciation. And for any of my consoles that currently have a working battery in them, I think it is only right that we give it the little power. So yeah, this console honestly does take a little while to boot up, and there are definitely signs of it being one of my older consoles. I don't know if you can tell here, but the original stylus is a little bit loose in here. There have been a couple times where I've gotten very close to losing it. The little pad here as well, you can see little signs of tear, but I love this console. It just means so much to me, and it was a way to really revitalize my interest in the Pokemon games when they moved to 3D. After I got my 2DS, I went through another bit of a hiatus and not getting a new console for quite a while, actually. For a couple reasons. One, that console worked for the games that I had on it. And for two, I honestly kind of found myself drifting away from Pokemon a little bit. I felt like as I got to later middle school and early high school, I just found myself and my friends just drifting from the franchise. And, just to kind of keep up with everyone else, I didn't really come back to it as frequently. But gradually, I found myself being more curious, revisiting my old games, my old consoles, going to game stores to find secondhand copies of some of the games I hadn't played, like Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon. And around the same time is when Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were released to the Switch. And so at that point I thought, maybe it's time to take the jump again and to really get back into Pokemon series. And for that I got a Nintendo Switch. The Switch is, I think, a really great console, but obviously also really changes the identity and the design of what a handheld from Nintendo looks like. This had not only the opportunity to be a handheld, but also to dock and to play on a TV. And it was really cool. It was a really cool opportunity to be able to play Pokemon games on a larger screen. As someone who had never done that before and only played them within your hands, because I think it kind of brings another sense of life to the games you're playing. I really liked the features of, the Joy-Cons coming on and off of the Switch. To be honest, I don't play this one as much anymore. With another console that's come out later, spoiler, the Switch 2, all of my game data has been migrated over to that console, but I still really like this, and having not touched it for quite a while, in all honesty, I really like the feel of it in my hands. Like, the size of it feels good. It's a little bit bigger. Obviously, it doesn't fit in your pocket like some of the other consoles do, but definitely a little smaller. Has probably an easier hand feel than the Switch 2 does. Here's that Switch menu that we love, and you can see all of my old games here, although none of the save file is actually attached to this console anymore. As much as I do love the Switch, I did start to have a couple issues with the Joy-Cons coming a little loose. You can kind of see as well there, I've got a little scratch on the screen, unfortunately. But, you know, I love the Switch. And I feel like this console coming out and Pokemon being migrated to it was such a huge moment for me, really fully embracing my love for the franchise and realizing that that was always going to be something that meant a lot to me. So, I love the Switch. Up until this point, I think my console purchasing history has made a lot of sense, linear sense. They stopped producing Pokemon games for the DS, so you get 3D or the 2DS. They stopped making the 2DS, 3DS Pokemon games. You get the Switch. But then, when I was in college, I feel like I really started to want to revisit some of the older games and not just play what had most recently come out. And I was in a local game store, a secondhand game store, just for fun, and I saw this behind the counter, a Game Boy Advance SP. And that really kind of blew my mind because this was a console that was never a part of my life. None of my friends ever had the Game Boy Advance SP. Even the Game Boy Advance that I did have before, none of my friends were really into that. I think it was a little bit before our generation or our time, and so everyone was into the DS. Everyone had a DS. So seeing one of these, which is kind of the true predecessor to the DS with the, folding clamshell design, was super cool to me. And I saw it. It was being sold for around $100, which I think at the time, honestly, was probably a little bit higher than it should be. I think now it seems like the prices are kind of fluctuating a lot, and with a lot of nostalgic game memorabilia and materials seem to be rising in price a lot, but I didn't think it was too bad, and so I picked this up along with a copy of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, just to have something to kind of mess around with and play with as a turn-based game. And eventually, when I got home, found some of my old Game Boy Advance Pokemon games, started looking more seriously on expanding my collection, and just, starting to feel like my relationship with Pokemon was to get all the games and play through all the games and experience that. And so this, I think, was the console that really brought me to that point. And when we talk about portability, the size of this thing is perfect. I love it. Fits right in your pocket, fits in a small bag, and I think, quite frankly, I have a lot of nostalgia and bias towards the DS Lite because it was my first console, but I think this, honestly, is kind of the best design. It plays arguably some of the best games in the Gen 3 games. I think maybe the only argument that the DS has over this is that it has a larger game catalog for Pokemon, which is for sure true, but I just think there's something so nice about playing on this small little device, whether it be on the couch, in bed, on the train, anywhere really. It's just such an accessible console. And again, when it comes to the intro screens, it might be the best one as well. So good. Unfortunately, I have the AGS 001, or I don't have the version of this console that has the slightly brighter screen. That is something I'm, considering when it comes to expanding my console collection. But I still love this thing, and whenever I'm traveling, whenever I'm going anywhere, this thing has to come with me. So yeah, top tier console, potentially my favorite. So once I bought that Game Boy Advance SP, I think I was a sophomore in college, yeah, and going back to play some of the older Pokemon games, that console kept me busy. However, after finding that console and then going back and looking on places like Facebook Marketplace to try to find games at a better price, I had been kind of constantly since then checking Facebook Marketplace for other deals on consoles and just looking to see if I could expand my collection. And funnily enough, I haven't actually bought a console from Facebook Marketplace. However, I have kind of since always been on the search, whether it be on Facebook Marketplace or games shops in any city or any country actually that I have traveled to since then. So my next console is actually an international purchase. It is a regular 3DS in all black that I think probably has the best story surrounding how I purchased this and came about it. So, as a junior in college, I did a semester abroad in Hong Kong. And as part of that, the group of friends that I made over there, and I went to Macau. For those who are unaware, Macau is known for its really big and luxurious casinos. And I had never gambled before, and I never really had an interest in gambling. But I went with my friends to experience it and ended up getting a decent amount of money at a blackjack table, weirdly enough. I made probably about 200 to 250 US dollars and just kind of quit there and took the money. And so at that point, I was like, what am I going to do with this money? I had a stipend from school to cover food and other sort of living expenses that I needed. I was living on campus, so everything was relatively cheap. I was like, I want to use this money towards something. And there was a little game market that I had found. I'll see if I can go find footage or at least pictures from my time there. But it was just stories and stories of different gaming and anime memorabilia. And at one of those stations, I found this. Now, I definitely overpaid for it, but there was something about it, just being in that environment in Hong Kong, using the money I made gambling, that I was like, I have to get this. I have to get this console. That is it's just a funny story. It's a story, and that's worth it. And that's how I came about this bad boy. And I really like this console. I think I had never had the 3DS before. I think I'd always convinced myself the 2DS was better. And honestly, I think in a lot of ways that it genuinely is. But there is just something that's more nostalgic and charming about having the clamp design like we've been talking about. There's this sleek metallic finish to it that is just so clean. The condition on this thing is honestly really good. Like, you look at the labeling here and even the outer shell, and there's like no scratches. And yeah, I loved having this. I played on it when I was traveling, when I was commuting through the city, and it was just something that I really enjoyed having on my trip. While as much as I do love this console, it might be dead right now. I haven't actually touched it in a while, and as much as I do love it, it is a little finicky sometimes when it comes to turning it on and off. So I'm gonna put it on the charger for a bit and hopefully be able to get some footage of the system actually working. But yeah, this one is fantastic. Still has the little stylus as well, and love it. And I think more than anything, I love the story that it comes with. On to our penultimate console here. Again, that selection that I had at that point kind of filled most of my needs. If not, honestly, it filled all my needs. It could play every single, at this point, generation of Pokemon. So I was no longer in a need to have consoles to access different games. But as I mentioned earlier, the concept of being able to play games on the system that kind of are associated with them was something that really interested me. And right before I went back for my senior year of college, I was in my hometown and I had picked up actually a copy of Pokemon Yellow. And a little bit after that point as well, I found myself in my local game shop and found this bad boy, the Game Boy Color, in that same yellow color. And I just thought it looked great. Honestly, it's not in the best condition. You can see the screen is, maybe you can't pick up on it, but the screen is definitely scratched. But I've never had one of the original Game Boys or Game Boy Color, and had also picked up a couple copies of the Gen 2 games while I was abroad that semester before, and so I kind of impulsively purchased this so that I could have something to play those games on. Obviously, could play them on my Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Advance SP, but there's something about being able to play it on a system that is a little bit more true to that era of gaming. And, you know, by no means is this the best gaming experience. The screen is super dark, and the sound quality isn't the best either. But, you know, there's something sort of charming about this. And again, you know, it doesn't have the fold-over design, but is a very narrow, compact thing that is easy to carry around, and so I really appreciated that. And so, not the most different, but we can give it a little shot there. Kind of quiet, but a cool piece. It's a statement. I display this one on my shelf as well, just because of the pop of color, and because, quite frankly, I don't play on it too much. But I like being able to say that I have a Game Boy Color, especially in this actual shade of yellow. I really like it. And lastly, the most recent pickup I've had as a console was, of course, the Switch 2. Compared to everything else I've had, this thing is giant. It is insane. I cannot imagine traveling and playing this just on a commute, or even at a cafe, or just taking this anywhere, because it is so big. Like, to me, this is not even a handheld. It's bigger than my head, and I have a pretty big head even. So honestly, don't know how I feel about moving in this direction in terms of the size of the console. However, the performance of it has been great. I have really enjoyed playing Legend ZA on this thing. I really like the adjustment of the Joy-Cons to being like this magnetic pop in and out. I like the larger stand because, again, I'm rarely playing it like this. I'm either pretty much playing it on my TV or propped up with the Joy-Cons off. But yeah, honestly, I like it. It's, again, kind of goes away from the charm of handheld consoles, I think, quite honestly. And I don't really want this to become a norm. I would really like if Nintendo continues to make either a Lite version of the Switch or even a second, like, fully portable console, because I think that is such an important piece of Nintendo history. But, you know, we'll see how we go. There's not too much I feel like you can really say about this because people have done actual extensive reviews of it. There's not much of a story that comes around it either. It's not something that I picked up secondhand. I got it as a treat for myself for my birthday, and it's about all there is to it. But it's crazy to see how far we've come from, you know, something like this to something like this. And, you know, I know a lot of people sort of miss the more classic era. I definitely do, myself in some ways, but I think regardless, it would be silly to act as if there are not a lot of really great things that come with being able to play games, and Pokemon specifically, on a console like this. So, you know, not too different. It's actually pretty similar to the original Switch, but I forgot I had been playing. But, you know, not too dissimilar to the other previous menu. And, you know, say what you will, but I have definitely gotten my money's worth of this thing thus far, and it hasn't even been out for that long. Thank you guys for sticking around and for watching me talk about these consoles. I am not necessarily a huge console collector. I'm definitely more of a fan of collecting the Pokemon games. So if you guys are interested in seeing my collection of the physical games, at some point, maybe that's a video I can make kind of as a follow-up to this. But yeah, I think when I look at consoles, there's such a great way, especially the handheld ones, to, you know, really take the game with you. It's such a special way to be able to do that and get not only immersed in the world of the game you're playing, but also in the world outside of you. When you have something like this, you can go play in a park, you can go play on your commute to work or on your commute to school. And I think there's something special about that. And I hope we don't lose sight of that as Nintendo continues to push maybe these less portable designs, but nonetheless it's interesting to see how these consoles are progressing. In terms of some of my wants or things I'd maybe like to add to my collection, again, like I said, I don't really feel a need to have one of every console or anything like that, because I can play the games that I want to play on what I have. But I do kind of have an interest in, maybe one day getting a Nintendo DS, an original DS, the sort of chunkier versions. Additionally, like I mentioned, maybe one of the AGS 101 Game Boy Advances, Game Boy Advance SPs, that will be a little bit brighter on their screen, have a slightly better battery life as well. Or maybe even like a updated console that someone has modded themselves just to be a little bit more up to par with some of the technological needs of today. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and take care.